He smiled at me across the dinner table, like a man with nothing to hide, and I smiled back like a woman who hadn't just found his name on a hotel receipt that afternoon. That was the moment I understood that the most dangerous thing a person can do in a marriage is underestimate the one sitting across from them every single morning. My name is Celestine Hargrove. I was married to Warren for 29 years, raised 2 daughters in a house we built together in Atlanta, kept his books when he started his first business, worked the front desk of a real estate office to cover our mortgage when his commission checks ran thin, and stood beside him at every funeral, every celebration, every hard season that came for us across nearly 3 decades. I thought we had already survived the worst of it. I thought the hard years were behind us. I was wrong about that. And the way I found out changed every single thing. I thought I knew about the life I was living. It started the way these things usually do. Not with something loud, but with something small. A change in texture so subtle you almost convince yourself you imagined it. Warren had always been a man who moved through the house with a kind of ease, unhurried, comfortable in his own skin. The kind of man who left his phone on the counter and walked away from it without a thought. So when I noticed him carrying it room to room like it had become an extension of his hand, I filed it away without meaning to. Not suspicion yet, just a note in the back of my mind that something had shifted. He started working later. Not every night, just often enough that it stopped being unusual. And when he came home, he was present the way a man is present, when part of him is still somewhere else, answering my questions, asking about the girls, sitting across from me at dinner with his eyes on his plate more than they used to be. I let it go the way you let things go when you have spent 29 years building something you believe in. You give the benefit of the doubt because you have earned that kind of faith in each other. Or so you think. It was a Thursday in February when I found the first thing, not looking for it, opening the hall closet to pull out an extra blanket because the heat had gone out in the back of the house, and a folded piece of paper fell from the shelf where Warren kept his weekend bag. I picked it up the way you pick up something that has no reason to alarm you, and read it once, and then again, because the first time through my eyes refused to accept what was printed there. A hotel confirmation. 2 nights. Dated the same weekend Warren had told me he was in Charlotte for a contractor conference he attended every year. The hotel was not in Charlotte. The hotel was 40 minutes from our front door. I stood in that closet a long time, holding a piece of paper that had just rearranged everything. Then I refolded it exactly as I had found it, placed it back on the shelf where it had fallen from, closed the closet door, and went back to the kitchen to finish making dinner. Because the first thing I understood in that moment was that what I did with what I now knew mattered more than the knowing itself. I did not confront him that night. I did not cry where he could see it. I sat across from Warren at the dinner table and listened to him talk about a project he was bidding on, asked the right questions, passed the bread when he reached for it, and kept my face so still that not one thing in my expression gave away the fact that the floor beneath our entire marriage had just dropped out from under me. That weekend, Warren took the girls to his mother's in Savannah, something he did every few months, and I had the house to myself for 2 days. I used them. I went through the joint account statement for the first time, not as a wife paying bills, but as a woman trying to understand where money had been going that she had never been asked about. The first thing that stopped me was a charge at a jewelry retailer I had never set foot in, dated 6 weeks back. I had not received anything. I did not remember a gift, an occasion, an explanation. I kept scrolling. 2 transfers out to an account I did not recognize. Smaller amounts, 30 days apart. Both routed to the same external destination, with a memo line that said only operations. I wrote every date down on a piece of paper and sat with it. Then I did something I had never done in 29 years of marriage. I searched my husband's name on the county property records site, the way you would look up a stranger. What came back made me sit down slowly in my own kitchen chair. An LLC filed 11 months ago. Warren Hargrove listed as sole member. The business name, Meridian Capital Holdings, meant nothing to me, but the filing date meant everything. 11 months ago was 5 weeks after my father passed, and the life insurance payout from his policy had landed in our joint account. Money I had wept over before I had touched a single dollar of it. Money I had told Warren plainly was for our future, for the girls' education, for the house we had talked about buying outright before we retired. He had taken my father's money and built something with his name on it alone. I closed the laptop the way you close something. You're not sure you can look at twice in one sitting? Then I opened it again, because sitting with half a truth is worse than facing the whole one. I called a number I had kept in my phone for 2 years, ever since my closest friend went through her own divorce, and came out the other side with her house, her retirement account, and her name on things her husband had spent years trying to quietly remove her from. The attorney's name was Diane Collier. She picked up on the second ring, and her voice was the kind of calm that comes not from indifference, but from competence. She had heard worse than what I was about to say, and she did not need me to perform my pain for her. She just needed the facts. I gave them to her. The hotel confirmation, the jewelry charge, the transfers, the LLC filed with my father's money 5 weeks after the insurance payout cleared our account. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me one question that settled something cold and permanent in my chest. Are the accounts still joint? All of them, I said. Good, she said. Do not move anything. Do not say anything to him. And do not let your face change. Most women call me after they have already told their husband what they know. You have not. That is the only advantage that matters right now. Hang on to it. I drove home from that phone call feeling like I was carrying something loaded in my lap, something that could go off in any direction, depending entirely on how carefully I moved. Diane's instruction was simple, and it was the hardest thing I had ever been asked to do. Smile at this man, cook his meals, ask about his day, fold his laundry, and never once let a single thing in my face or my voice give away the fact that I was no longer living inside our marriage. I was building a case around it. Warren came home from Savannah on a Sunday evening, kissed me on the cheek the way he always did, light and absent, like a habit he performed without thinking. He dropped his bag in the hall, asked what I'd made for dinner, sat down at the table, and looked at me once with an expression I could not quite read, like he was checking something. I gave him nothing back but warmth. The kind of warmth a man sees when he believes his wife still knows nothing. He seemed satisfied with that. He picked up his fork and told me about his mother's garden, and I listened and nodded and refilled his glass, and behind my eyes I was counting every date I had written on that piece of paper. It was the following Tuesday that Diane called me back with something new. She had requested the public business filings attached to Meridian Capital Holdings, and what came back gave both of us pause. The registered agent on the LLC was not a law firm or a filing service the way most small businesses use. It was an individual, a woman named Simone Travers. I'd never heard that name before. I sat with it for a long moment, feeling the particular kind of stillness that comes when something you have been half afraid to know becomes impossible to avoid. Diane's voice stayed even. I'm not drawing conclusions yet, she said, but when a married man files a business LLC and lists a private individual as his registered agent without disclosing any of this to his spouse, that creates questions worth asking in front of a judge. What do we do? I asked. We go back to the money, she said. Every time. The affair may be true or it may not be, but the money is already on paper. It does not get nervous. It does not change its story, and it does not ask for time to think. Find me every dollar that moved after that LLC was filed. I went back into the account that night after Warren fell asleep, and I read every line of 11 months of statements the way Diane had taught me to, not as a wife recognizing familiar charges, but as an investigator who had never met the account holder before. The transfer pattern became visible on the second pass. 3 withdrawals, each one routed to the same external account I had flagged before, spread across 11 months, each one landing within a week of what I had started quietly calling a gap, a window where Warren's schedule had been vague, where he had been out of reach in a way that had not alarmed me at the time, but now looked different under this new kind of light. I pulled up my own calendar, the one I'd kept for years out of old habit. Doctor appointments, school events, family dinners. The first withdrawal had cleared 3 days after Warren told me he was in Nashville for a 2-day meeting. I had not questioned it. He traveled for work. He always had. I checked the second date. The second withdrawal had moved 6 weeks later. The same weekend he had driven to Columbus for what he said was a property walkthrough that he had come back from early and tired and quieter than usual. I checked the third. The third transfer sat beside a week in October when Warren had told me his phone battery kept dying and I might not hear from him much. I had made a note of it because I had called his office and been told he was working remotely. I lined the dates up the way Diane had shown me, and something I could no longer call coincidence took shape on the page in front of me. 3 transfers, 3 gaps, all pointing in the same direction. I called Diane before I even closed my notebook. She listened, and then she said something I wrote down word for word. "The pattern is not proof of an affair," she said, "but it is proof of a financial pattern. And financial patterns in a divorce proceeding are exactly what courts look at when one party claims money moved for legitimate reasons and the other party says it did not. We are building the argument from the ground up, Celestine. Every date you find is another stone in the foundation. Keep going." I kept going. It was the following week, at a Sunday dinner at our older daughter Nadia's house, when the second thing happened. Warren was in the backyard with Nadia's husband, and I was in the kitchen with Nadia helping her plate the food, when she said something so quietly I almost missed it under the sound of the oven. "Daddy seemed distracted at Easter," she said, not looking at me, like something was pulling at him. I kept my hands moving on the dishes. "How do you mean?" He kept stepping away to check his phone. 3, 4 times during dinner. Not like himself? She paused. "Mom, is everything okay with you two?" I looked at my daughter across the counter, this woman I had raised, and I made the decision in that moment the same way I had made every decision since February. I kept my face still. "We are fine," I said. "Your father has a new project he is managing. You know how he gets when something is in early stages." She accepted that. She wanted to accept it. Children, even grown ones, want to believe the architecture of their family is sound. It is not dishonesty that makes them look away. It is love. I could not give her the weight of what I was carrying, not yet. Not until I had something solid enough to hand her, instead of just pain. Warren and I drove home from Nadia's in near silence, and somewhere on the highway, he said something that told me more than he intended to. "Calvin is pushing me to restructure Meridian before the end of year," he said, watching the road. "Tax positioning. I want to move some of the operating funds into a holding structure." Calvin was his accountant. I had met the man 4 times at company events. I kept my voice completely neutral. "Is that necessary right now?" I asked. He shrugged. "Easier to do it before things get complicated," he said, and then seemed to catch himself, like the last 3 words had slipped out ahead of his thinking. He did not explain what complicated meant. He changed the subject to road construction on the highway, and I let him, because I had already taken out my phone in my lap and typed 3 words into my notes app. "Before things complicate." I sent that note to Diane at 11 o'clock that night. Her response came back in less than a minute. "Tell him nothing. I am sending a preservation notice tomorrow morning." Warren read the preservation letter at the kitchen table 2 evenings later. I watched his jaw tighten in the second paragraph. He set it down flat and looked at me with an expression that was trying very hard to be reasonable and not quite making it. "This is aggressive," he said. "I have not done anything that was not already within my rights." "Then there is nothing to worry about," I said, and held his eyes without blinking. He picked up the letter again, folded it along its creases, and carried it upstairs without finishing dinner. I sat at the table alone and thought about what Diane had said to me 3 days before. Men who move money quickly when they feel watched are not reorganizing. They are protecting. And protecting tells a story all by itself. She was right. Diane called me the following Thursday morning, and I heard something different in her voice, the particular sharpness of a woman who had just found exactly what she was looking for. "He moved $63,000 out of Meridian Capital Holdings 4 days after the preservation notice was delivered," she said. "Routed it through a new account under a different company name. Filed a new entity 2 weeks ago. He thinks he restructured his way around the problem. He did not. Every wire transfer, every timestamp, every routing number is now part of the record. The preservation notice does not freeze his money," she explained, "but it documents everything that moves after it lands in his hands. He gave us a financial trail we could not have manufactured if we had tried." "What does this do to our case?" She paused just briefly. "It changes the shape of everything," she said. "He no longer gets to call Meridian his separate property if community funds built it, ran it, and now community money has been visibly moved out of it while divorce proceedings are active. The court does not have to take his word for what the money was for. We have the receipts, we have the dates, we have the wire confirmations, and now we have a man who moved $63,000 4 days after being told to preserve marital assets and then called it tax planning." The meeting with his attorney happened on a Wednesday, a formal session with both legal teams in a conference room that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. Warren's attorney, a man named Douglas Park, sat across from me with a proposal already printed and bound, the kind of document men produce when they believe the conversation is a formality. He slid it across the table himself. He did not wait for Diane to ask. His client was proposing a 70-30 split of the marital estate, he said. 70% to Warren, 30% to me, based on Meridian Capital Holdings being classified as Warren's separate property, and Warren's disproportionate financial contribution to the marriage over time. He also noted that his client had initiated the separation in good faith, suggesting I had already accepted the terms by cooperating with the process thus far. I read the number printed in plain black type and felt something settle in me that was not grief and was not rage. It was closer to recognition. He had priced out 29 years of my life, the way you price out something that has already lost most of its value. I set the document down. "Mr. Park," I said, my voice easy and unhurried, "can you walk me through the tracing documentation that supports Meridian being classified as separate property? I would like to understand the basis." Something in the room changed, not loudly, just a slight recalibration in Douglas's posture, a pause that lasted a beat too long. "We will provide full supporting documentation during discovery," he said. "Of course," I said pleasantly. "I would just hate for either side to build a proposal on an assumption that does not survive financial scrutiny once the tracing is complete." Diane reached over and opened the folder she had brought without announcing it. She did not slide anything across the table. She simply rested one document beside her legal pad, closed the folder, and left it there. Douglas's eyes dropped to it for less than a second. Warren shifted beside him in a way that told me he had noticed something shift in the room, even if he could not name exactly what it was. "Perhaps," Douglas said, clearing his throat carefully, "both sides should allow discovery to conclude before finalizing percentage discussions." Diane spoke for the first time. "I think that is a sensible suggestion," she said, "and nothing more. We wrap 30 minutes later, no agreement signed, no number confirmed." Warren walked out ahead of me, and in the hallway outside the conference room, I watched him lean toward Douglas and say something low and tight-jawed that Douglas answered with a small, cautious shake of his head. Whatever Warren had believed walking into that room, he did not still believe it walking out. Diane appeared at my elbow, her voice just above a whisper. "You rattled them both in there," she said. "Good. That was the point." The hearing itself was 3 weeks later, and the courtroom had a weight to it that the conference room had never carried. A court reporter, a judge's bench, the quiet authority of a room where words go on the record and stay there. Diane laid the case out the way she had promised she would from the very first call, clean and methodical, one exhibit at a time. "Your Honor," she said, "Meridian Capital Holdings was filed 11 months ago, using funds that had first been deposited into the parties' joint account following Mrs. Hargrove's father's life insurance payout." She slid the first exhibit forward. Mr. Hargrove subsequently represented the company as his separate property, despite the fact that community funds were transferred into its operating account repeatedly following its creation. He also moved $63,000 out of the business 4 days after receiving a court-ordered preservation notice, routing those funds to a newly formed entity under a different name. Douglas stood. "Your Honor, the LLC was formed with Mr. Hargrove's intent to maintain separate ownership. That intent is well documented." The judge looked up from her papers. "Intent is not tracing, Mr. Park. The issue is not what Mr. Hargrove intended. The issue is where the money came from and where it went," Diane continued. "The financial records show community funds deposited into Meridian on 3 separate occasions across 11 months. Business expenses were also recorded during those same windows, including hotel charges, travel costs, and purchases at a retail jewelry counter, none of which are accompanied by documentation identifying a legitimate business purpose. We are not arguing about the nature of the personal relationship," she said. "We are arguing that community assets were spent for non-marital purposes and that a significant sum was subsequently moved after a preservation order was in place." Douglas tried again. "Even assuming some commingling occurred, the amounts are relatively modest compared to the business's total valuation. My client disputes the characterization of those expenditures as waste and reserves the right to produce documentation of legitimate business use during continued discovery." Diane did not argue with him. She simply slid another exhibit forward. "The pattern of transfers," she said, "the timing of those transfers relative to personal travel, The post-notice movement of $63,000 and the absence of any business documentation to support the challenged expenditures collectively establish a course of conduct that this court should consider when determining equitable division of the marital estate. The room went quiet. The judge studied the exhibits for a long moment, glasses low on her nose. "Mr. Park," she said at last, "does your client dispute the tracing of these transfers or the movement of funds following the preservation order?" Douglas leaned to Warren, whispered quickly. Whatever Warren said back was not what his attorney needed to hear. After a pause that told its own story, Douglas stood. "Your Honor, we would request additional time to review the financial tracing, verify the underlying accounting, and supplement our response to the exhibits presented today." "Granted," the judge said. "This court will reconvene in 3 weeks, at which time the evidence regarding commingling of community property, alleged waste of marital assets, and the transfer of funds following the preservation notice will be fully considered." She closed the file. Warren sat very still beside his attorney, staring at the bench like a man waiting for a different sentence to follow the one he had just heard. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and my breathing steady, and I felt something I had not felt in months. Not peace, not yet, but the solid, settled certainty of a woman who had done everything right when everything around her was wrong. The ruling came 3 weeks later. Having reviewed the evidence regarding the formation and funding of Meridian Capital Holdings, the commingling of community property established through financial tracing, the documented waste of marital assets through non-marital expenditures, and the transfer of $63,000 subsequent to the preservation order issued by this court, the judge said, "This court finds that a disproportionate division of the community estate is just and right." I kept my hands still in my lap, my face composed, the way Diane had coached me through every stage of this. The court awarded 68% of the marital estate, including Meridian Capital Holdings, to Mrs. Hargrove. Mr. Hargrove is awarded 32% of the remaining marital estate and shall bear full responsibility for any tax liabilities associated with the dissolution of the LLC and the post-notice transfers. Douglas's pen stopped moving on his legal pad. Warren sat with the kind of stillness a man has when he's waiting for a word to come back and take something terrible with it. It did not come back. This court further notes, the judge continued, that Mr. Hargrove's proposal of a 70-30 allocation relied substantially on a separate property position the evidence does not support. The financial tracing presented at hearing established otherwise. The ruling is final. Diane squeezed my hand once under the table. Just once. Controlled and quick. The only celebration either of us allowed inside that room. We walked out into the hallway, and I was almost through the courthouse doors when Warren said my name behind me. I turned. His attorney was already ahead of him, giving us the space. Warren stood under the hallway lights, looking older than he had in the conference room weeks before, like the ruling itself had aged him in the span of an hour. "I just want to say one thing," he said. "Not about the money?" "Then say it." He held my eyes for a moment, jaw working. "That Sunday I came home from Columbus early. The weekend you called the office." He stopped, started again. "I told you I was tired from the drive." He looked down briefly, then back at me. "I was not tired from the drive." "I know," I said. He nodded once, slow, like something had finally been set down after being carried too long. "I am sorry, Celestine, for all of it, but especially for thinking you would not figure it out." The words did not break me. They did not need to. They simply removed the last place doubt could have lived, the thin crack of possibility where I might have spent years wondering if I had imagined the worst of it. He had just confirmed that I had not. He turned toward the elevators, and I stood alone in that hallway for a moment. Not sad, not triumphant, just clear, the particular clarity of a woman who has faced the full truth of something and found out she's stronger than it. The papers were finalized on a Friday, 6 weeks after the ruling. I signed my name at Diane's office with a steadiness that still surprises me when I think back on it. Meridian Capital Holdings transferred to my name under the final settlement. The marital home was awarded outright. Warren's share of the estate paid out according to the court's order, and the tax liability of $63,000 in post-notice transfers is his alone to carry. Diane closed the folder across the desk and looked at me with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who builds things properly and then watches them hold. "You did every part of this right," she said. I drove home that afternoon, past the house I now owned outright, past a neighborhood that looked the same as it always had, and felt entirely different than it ever had before. Not lighter exactly, but honest, like the air had stopped pretending. Nadia was on my front porch when I pulled in, 2 cups of coffee, the way she had started showing up most Fridays since the day I'd finally sat her down at the kitchen table and told her the whole truth in plain language without softening a single edge of it. "How do you feel?" she asked, handing me a cup. "Like myself," I said. "For the first time in a long time." She nodded, and we sat together on the steps in the afternoon quiet, and neither of us needed to fill it with anything. That evening, going through a box of old documents I'd been putting off for months, I found a letter Warren had written me on our 10th anniversary, before he made his first real money, back when we were still in the small house, and I was still working the real estate front desk, and we were still the kind of couple that wrote things down, because we did not yet have enough to show each other any other way. "To Celestine," it began, "the woman who believed in this before I did. Whatever I build from here, I build, because you held the ground when I did not know how. That was the man I married. Somewhere in the next 19 years, he decided the ground was his alone, once he had been standing on it long enough to forget who held it first." I folded the letter and placed it back in the box, not with anger and not with grief, but with the quiet finality of a woman who understands the difference between the man someone was and the man they chose to become. Warren thought the business was his. He thought the money was hidden. He thought I would sit quietly across from him at dinner and accept 29 years of my life being valued at 30 cents on the dollar. He was wrong about every single one of those things. He took my father's grief money and built a company with his name on it. The court put my name on it instead. He moved $63,000 the week after being told to preserve what we had built. The judge handed him the bill. He called my contribution to our life something that only mattered when it was convenient for him to remember it. The ruling remembered it for him in percentages he will carry for the rest of his life. Here is what I want you to hear, because this is the part that matters beyond the receipts and the rulings and the courtroom. The moment that changed everything was not the hotel confirmation falling off that shelf in February. It was not finding the LLC filed with my father's money. It was not the preservation letter or the wire confirmations or the exhibit Diane rested beside her legal pad without saying a word. The moment that changed everything was the one in the kitchen closet when I picked up that piece of paper, and instead of falling apart, I refolded it exactly as I had found it, and decided that what I did next mattered more than how I felt right now. Most people at that moment go the other way. They confront each other. They cry where the wrong person can see it. They show their hand before they have a hand worth showing. And then they spend years wondering why everything they said was used against them, and nothing they felt was ever enough. The woman who wins in that situation, the woman who actually walks out of that courthouse with 68% of a life she helped build, is not necessarily the angriest woman in the room or the most articulate one. She is the one who understands that silence at the right moment is a strategy, that patience is a form of power, and that the truth does not need you to perform it. It just needs you to document it. You're standing right now at the same place I was standing in that closet. Maybe not with a hotel receipt in your hand. Maybe with something quieter. A feeling you keep talking yourself out of. A pattern you keep forgiving before you have even named it. A version of yourself you have been setting aside for so long that you have stopped noticing you are doing it. Most people read something like this and feel it deeply and then go back to the life they already have and tell themselves it does not apply to them. Not yet, maybe later, when things get clearer. But clarity does not arrive before courage. It arrives because of it. The women who come out the other side of something like this do not do it because they were fearless. They do it because they decided that what they knew was worth more than what they were afraid to lose. That is the choice, not later, right now. And only you know which side of it you're standing on.